The war did not begin on February 24, 2022. It began in the suffocating smoke of April 2014, when Russian soldiers in unmarked uniforms, little green men, with no insignia but death in their eyes, slithered into Crimea and ignited a wildfire of rebellion across the Donbas. Bakhmut, still called Artemivsk then, tasted the first metallic bite of betrayal. A humble town of 80,000 souls, cradled above labyrinthine salt mines that stretched like the veins of the earth itself and wrapped in vineyards that once bled Ukraine's sweetest, most effervescent sparkling wine, it straddled two arteries of survival, the T-0504, west to Kostiantynivka, Kramatorsk, Sloviansk, and the T-0513 north to Siversk. These roads were the pulsing veins of Ukrainian Donbas, a clenched fist shove into the throat of separatist territory. To seize Bakhmut was to crush that fist until the knuckles snapped. On April 12, 2014, Igor Bezler, shaved skull gleaming like a blade, Giurgiu cruelty etched into every line of his face, rolled into the central square like a plague on wheels. His men, a motley crew of mercenaries and local thugs, stormed City Hall with the casual brutality of men who had done this before. They raised the rag of the self-proclaimed Donetsk People's Republic, spat the word liberated, and claimed the city as their own. For 3 months, Bakhmut became a hostage in its own skin, checkpoints like nooses strangling every street, police stations gutted and looted, until only the echoes of screams remained, rail yards vomiting weapons north to Sloviansk under the cover of night. The air itself seemed to thicken with fear and diesel. Then the city screamed back with everything it had. On July 6, 2014, Ukrainian forces, raw volunteers with trembling hands, the newborn National Guard still learning how to hold a rifle, the 3rd Separate Assault Brigade forged in the fire of desperation, unleashed Operation Artemivsk. What followed was 3 days of primal house-to-house slaughter that turned the city into a butcher's canvas. Snipers in the high-rise on Sychovik-Streltsev Street wept silently as they squeezed triggers, watching through scopes as men they had once called neighbors fell. Alexander Sanya Kovalenko, a 22-year-old history teacher whose fingers had once traced the curves of ancient maps now wrapped around a PKM machine gun, remembered the boy who died in his arms with a clarity that burned like acid. We cleared the drama theater room by room, grenades through windows. Dima, 19, still had baby fat on his cheeks, was shredded by an RPG in the stairwell. His scream tore the air like a blade through flesh. I held him as he bled out, his eyes wide with the terror of a child who had never even kissed a girl. I still wake tasting his blood on my tongue, feeling his fingers go cold in mine. By dusk on July 7th, the Ukrainian flag clawed its way back up the pole, stained with the sweat and tears of the living. The separatists fled east, leaving behind scorched BTRs, shattered glass, and 27 cooling corpses that would haunt the dreams of every survivor. Bakhmut was free, but the freedom tasted of ash and gunpowder, and the city would never again know peace. For 8 long years, Bakhmut bled slowly, 1,000 cuts that never quite healed. Shells fell like judgment from a vengeful god. In October 2016, a Grad rocket erased a playground on Myru Street in a single deafening roar. 12-year-old Anastasia's body lay folded like a broken doll, her pigtails tangled in the swing chains. Her mother, Svetlana Hrehorivna, a nurse whose hands had delivered babies into the world and now stitched soldiers back together with trembling fingers, refused to abandon the ruins that had become her prison and her purpose. Someone had to hold the dying. 30 families crammed into the basement, one candle flickering like a dying star. The children drew sunflowers on the walls with crayons they had scavenged from the rubble, golden ghosts they hadn't seen in years. I still smell their crayon wax and fear, hear their whispers in the dark. When will the sun come back, Auntie Svetlana? By 2021, the population had hemorrhaged to under 70,000. The sparkling wine factory, once a cathedral of celebration where couples toasted their weddings, was a tomb of shattered bottles and broken dreams. The T0504 highway was a scar of craters, each one a grave for a tire or a life. Ukrainian soldiers manned trenches just 15 kilometers from DPR lines, their eyes hollow with the knowledge that every dawn might be their last. Drone patrols flew nightly, their buzz a constant reminder of the eyes in the sky. Bakhmut had become a fortress of grief, a city that had learned to live with death as a neighbor and a target. Russia's full-scale invasion on February 24, 2022, bypassed Bakhmut at first. Moscow dreamed of encircling Kiev in 3 days, of swallowing the East in a single triumphant gulp. When that dream shattered like glass under a boot, the Kremlin turned south with the fury of a wounded beast, its eyes bloodshot with rage and humiliation. By May, Bakhmut, now the beating heart of Ukrainian logistics in the Donbass, was objective number one, a prize to be taken at any cost. The first shell struck on May 10, 2022, a baptism of fire that announced the city's second death. 2-year-old Darina died in her stroller outside a bakery on Levanevskoho Street, her tiny body torn apart by shrapnel. Her mother's scream was a razor across the world, captured on a journalist's phone and broadcast until it became the war's soundtrack, a sound that would haunt the dreams of millions. By July, Popasna had fallen 20 kilometers southeast, its ruins a harbinger of what was to come. On July 25th, Russian forces seized the Vulahirska thermal power station, plunging half the city into a darkness that swallowed hope whole. Streetlights died, refrigerators warmed, the elderly froze in their apartments. The 93rd Mechanized Brigade Kolodny Yar, veterans of 8 years of war, dug in with the desperation of men who had nothing left to lose. They turned the Nov gypsum factory into a cathedral of defiance, its white walls stained red with blood and resolve. The cement plant became an ammunition crypt, its silos packed with shells that would sing death across the skyline. The salt mines, 200 meters deep and stretching for kilometers, were transformed into wombs of the wounded, where medics worked by headlamp and the air tasted of salt and despair. Soldiers slept in cellars, their dreams infested with the faces of the dead, and fought by day with the ferocity of cornered animals. Everything shattered into 1,000 screaming pieces. When the Wagner group took the field in August 2022, Yevgeny Prigozhin, hot dog vendor turned Kremlin caterer turned merchant of death, a man who had built his empire on the bones of the forgotten, had forged a private army in the crucible of Syria, Libya and Africa. In Ukraine, he became Russia's blunt instrument, a hammer to smash the Ukrainian fist. By summer 2022, he was raiding Russia's prisons like a reaper in a harvest of the damned. Murderers who had strangled wives in fits of rage, rapists who had stolen innocence, thieves who had taken everything but their own souls. Offered 6 months' service for freedom. Over 50,000 convicts marched east, their eyes hollow with the knowledge that Bakhmut would be their grave, their hearts already half buried in the mud. On August 4th, they attacked along Patrice Lumumba Street in the city's east. The tactic was medieval barbarism reborn, human waves. Convicts in grey prison fatigues, 3 days of training, 1 AK-47 each, orders to advance until victory or death. They were living sacrifices, meat probes sent forward to draw fire, to reveal Ukrainian positions, to die screaming so the elite could follow. Once the machine guns opened up, artillery and glide bombs erased the world in fire and steel. Survivors, if any, were sent again, their pleas for mercy answered with bullets in the back. Drone operator Ghost, A 28-year-old former IT specialist whose hands now shook as he flew death from the sky, filmed one wave, his voice cracking with horror. 30 men, no body armor, some without helmets, stumbling forward like zombies from a nightmare. 40 seconds of fire, 28 down, their bodies twitching in the dust. The last two turned and ran, their faces twisted in terror. Wagner snipers dropped them in the back with the casual cruelty of men swatting flies. I still hear their mothers' names on their lips, still see the light go out in their eyes. Elite Wagner veterans, hardened killers from Syria and Africa, their bodies inked with the tattoos of war, followed the meat, clearing rooms with flamethrowers that roared like dragons, turning apartments into infernos of screaming flesh. By October, the eastern suburbs, Opitne, Andrivka, Klishivka, were ash and memory, their names carved into the gravestones of the living. Winter came early, -15 Celsius, a white executioner that killed with the slow, deliberate cruelty of frostbite. Fingers blackened, toes turned to stone. Men wept as medics sawed off limbs with hacksaws, the screams echoing through the salt mines like the cries of the damned. On December 20th, 2022, President Zelensky walked the cratered Central Market, his boots crunching of frozen blood and glass. He pinned medals in a bombed-out school basement, the air thick with the stench of gangrene and despair. Serhiy Spartan Mikhailenko, a 42-year-old ex-boxer whose hands had once broken jaws in the ring, received his with fingers black as coal, the pain a constant companion. He said, "Hold the line. I wanted to scream that we were already ghosts in uniform, that every breath was borrowed, that I had buried more friends than I could count. But I just nodded, because what else was there to do?" 15 kilometers north lay Soledar, its 200 kilometers salt mine labyrinth, a flanking wound that bled into Bakhmut's defenses. On January 5, 2023, Wagner attacked with the ferocity of men who had nothing left to lose. For 12 days the war went subterranean, a nightmare in pitch black. Convicts with headlamps stumbled through tunnels, their breaths fogging in the freezing air. Ukrainians from the 46th Air Mobile Brigade counter-attacked with shotguns and grenades, the explosions ricocheting like thunder in a tomb, bodies stacked so high that men walked on the dead, their boots slipping in blood and salt. Salt dust and blood choked the air, turning every breath into a gasp of agony. Wagner dubbed it White Hell, but it was hell with no color, only darkness and death. On January 16th, Prigozhin planted his flag over Soledar's ruined administration building, his face twisted in triumph. 6,000 Russian lives bought a propaganda corps and enfilade fire into Bakhmut's northern approaches. A Wagner convict, Dmitry Volkodov Ivanov, a former armed robber who had once dreamed of seeing his daughter again, recorded a video diary from the mines, his voice hoarse with exhaustion. Day 47. We live down here. It's warm but the air is poison. Yesterday a Ukrainian threw a grenade into our tunnel. Lost 3 guys. One was only 22. Served 8 years for armed robbery. Said he wanted to see his daughter. Now he's in a bag. I still see her face in my dreams. A little girl I'll never meet. By March, 90% of Bakhmut was pulverized into moon dust. The Bakhmutka River, once a gentle stream where children had fished, became the final line of blood. On March 7th, Ukrainians blew the bridges with charges that echoed like the city's death knell, retreating to the western bank with boots soaked in the blood of brothers. Street fighting reached its apocalypse, room by room, floor by floor, inch by bloody inch. A New York Times reporter embedded with the 58th Motorized Brigade, his voice trembling with the weight of what he had seen. Dawn assault on an apartment block. The stairs were gone, blown to hell. We climbed the rubble like ants on a corpse. 3rd floor, Wagner with a shotgun. Point man vaporized his body a red mist. Then a grenade. I was thrown clear, woke in dust and blood. My squad was boots and red snow, their faces gone forever. Medic Olha Dok Kovalchuk, a 35-year-old mother of two who had left her children with her mother in Lviv, treated 47 wounded in one April day, her hands shaking with exhaustion and grief. No morphine left, just vodka and prayer. A boy, 19, barely shaved, his leg shredded to bone by shrapnel. He kept saying, "Tell mom I tried." I lied and said he'd make it. He died at 3 a.m., his eyes begging for a lie I couldn't give. I held him as he went, his blood warm on my arms, his last breath a whisper of her name. Prigozhin, his face gaunt with rage, filmed himself in a Bakhmut morgue, ringed by body bags, screaming like a man possessed by demons. "Shoigu! Gerasimov! Where is my ammunition? These are heroes, and you feed them to the dogs. I will bury you with them." The city's pre-war layout, dense Soviet apartment blocks stacked like tombstones, narrow streets that funneled men into killing choke points, hulking industrial complexes that loomed like monuments to suffering, collapsed under bombardment into a labyrinth of death. Every fallen building became a sniper's nest or a machine gun redoubt, every pile of rubble a grave for the living. Soldiers fought in 3 dimensions of horror, ground floors where grenades rolled under beds, upper stories where snipers picked off movement, basements where men drowned in their own blood, rooftops where drones hunted like hawks. A single grenade could bring down an entire stairwell and bury a squad alive, their screams muffled by concrete and despair. The Knaf gypsum factory, its white walls now stained red, endured 1,200 assaults. Its concrete corridors funneled attackers into killing arcs of despair, where machine guns sang their song of death. Prigozhin's doctrine was quantity over humanity, a meat grinder philosophy that turned men into statistics. 50,000 convicts, 3 days of training, 1 rifle each, orders to advance until victory or death. They were expendable probes. Locate Ukrainian fire, absorb it, die screaming so the elite could follow. Elite Wagner units, their eyes dead with the weight of 1,000 kills, followed the carnage. This churned out 1,500 to 2,000 Russian casualties daily. A single 200-meter stretch of Patrice Lumumba Street alone swallowed 8,000 Wagner dead in 4 months, their bodies piled like cordwood, their names already forgotten. Russia poured 60,000 to 80,000 shells a day, 10 times Ukraine's rate, a storm of steel that turned the city into a cratered moonscape. Iranian Shahed 136 drones screamed overhead like banshees, their explosions ripping apart entire blocks. Fab 500 glide bombs, 500-kilogram warheads guided by wings of death, erased entire neighborhoods in fireballs that sucked the air from lungs. Thermobaric warheads, the vacuum bombs, sucked oxygen from cellars, asphyxiating defenders in their sleep, their faces blue and twisted in silent screams. Ukraine's HIMARS struck back with pinpoint fury, but Russia's 5-to-1 artillery edge kept every Ukrainian position under constant soul-crushing fire. 1 square kilometer absorbed 1,000,000 kilograms of explosives across the battle, the ground itself weeping shrapnel. Both sides refused to yield, their will forged in the fire of obsession. Zelensky called Bakhmut the fortress of Ukraine's soul, a symbol that must not fall. Prigozhin needed a win to justify Wagner's existence in blood, to prove his worth to a Kremlin that used him like a disposable blade. No tactical retreat was permitted. Ukrainian brigades rotated every 3 to 7 days, surviving 4 hours in forward positions, before being mauled or annihilated. Convicts who turned back were shot by their own, their bodies left as warnings. The city became a static meat grinder, attrition without mercy, without end. Winter froze their weapons, fuel and flesh. Temperatures of -15 to -20 Celsius turned mud to ice and frostbite into a greater killer than bullets. Men wept as medics sawed off limbs with hacksaws and vodka, the screams echoing through the salt mines. Spring brought quagmires of mud that drowned men in flooded trenches, their bodies sucked under like offerings to the earth. Sanitation vanished, dysentery, trench foot, and pneumonia claimed thousands, their bodies wasting away in the dark. Salt mine shelters meant for safety became carbon monoxide tombs when generators poisoned the air, men dying in their sleep with smiles of relief. Drones swarmed the sky, thousands of cheap explosive-laden FPV craft, piloted by boys who had never held a rifle. A $400 drone could kill a $3 million tank or a squad in a trench, its explosion a flower of fire. Electronic jamming forced pilots to fly blind. Drone duels lit the night like fireworks of death. Open movement became suicide. Soldiers crawled through sewers thick with shit and blood, or waited for darkness with prayers on their lips, their hearts pounding like war drums. Ukraine clung to a single supply road, the T-0504, under perpetual fire, every convoy a gamble with death. Russia had 3 roads, but Wagner's convict logistics, no trained drivers, no mechanics, meant half the ammunition never arrived, shells rotting in the mud. Ukrainian elite units like the 93rd and 58th lost 70 to 80% strength in weeks, their ranks filled with teenagers and grandfathers. Russian convicts fought until death, their bodies piled like offerings. No reinforcements could match the hemorrhage of souls. The result was a casualty density of roughly 20,000 per square kilometer, denser than Stalingrad's Mamayev Kurgan or Verdun's Fort Douaumont. 1 death every 90 seconds for 378 days, a heartbeat of horror, a symphony of screams. 80 years apart, the battles rhyme in blood and ruin, twin infernos that devoured men and souls. Stalingrad burned for 162 days across 90 square kilometers, a continental cataclysm. Bakhmut bled for 378 days in 41 square kilometers, twice the duration, twice the density, a microcosm of madness. Stalingrad devoured up to 1.8 million lives, a holocaust of flesh. Bakhmut claimed 80,000 to 120,000, a tenth the scale but the same daily toll of souls, the same rhythm of death. Both were born of obsession, a madness that defied reason. Hitler wanted the city named for his enemy, a personal insult to be erased. Putin and Prigozhin needed a trophy to justify the war, a propaganda bauble to dangle before a nation. Zelensky needed a symbol to rally a nation's breaking heart, a beacon in the dark. No retreat orders echoed across the decades. Stalin's Order 227. Not one step back, and Wagner's blocking detachments, shooting their own in the back. Factory redoubts became legends. Red October in 1942, held for weeks by men who fought with teeth and nails. Nov Gypsum in 2023, its walls soaked in blood, enduring 1,200 assaults. Winter was the third combatant, -30 Celsius on the Volga, where the river froze and men starved in encirclement, -20 in Donbass, where frostbite devoured limbs and hope. Yet the wars diverged in agony, parallel lines of suffering. Stalingrad was continental destiny. Its fall broke the Wehrmacht, turned the tide of history and reshaped the world. Bakhmut was a tactical sideshow. 2 highways, no operational prize, a distraction in the grand scheme. Stalingrad's attackers were elite panzer divisions, their tanks roaring like beasts. Bakhmut's were prisoners with rifles, their eyes empty of everything but fear. Stalingrad's skies roared with Stukas and Yak fighters, a symphony of engines. Bakhmut's buzzed with $400 drones, a wine of plastic and death. Stalingrad ended in 91,000 German captives, marching into Siberian hell. Bakhmut ended with Wagner's mutiny, 25,000 mercenaries marching on Moscow and Prigozhin's plane exploding over Tver in a fireball of betrayal. Bakhmut was Stalingrad distilled. Same ferocity, smaller stage, hollow victory, a Pyrrhic triumph that cost more than it gained. Wagner was a shadow army, a cancer in the body of Russia, answerable only to Prigozhin, funded by Kremlin contracts fueled by the damned. It achieved what regular units could not: 9 months of relentless, soul-crushing pressure, a tide of flesh that ground down Ukrainian defenses. Prigozhin admitted 20,000 dead, half convicts, half his elite. Independent tallies reached 60,000 to 100,000 Russian losses, more per square kilometer than Stalingrad's factory district, a holocaust of waste. The cost cracked the regime open like an egg. Prigozhin's rages against Defense Minister Shoigu and Chief of the General Staff Gerasimov escalated into public screaming matches. On May 10th, he threatened to abandon Bakhmut, his voice breaking with fury. On May 20th, he planted his flag in the ruins of City Hall, his face twisted in triumph and exhaustion. 5 days later, Wagner withdrew, leaving the city to exhausted regulars and DPR militias. Resentment metastasized into treason. On June 23rd, Prigozhin accused the military of rocketing a Wagner rear camp, killing dozens. Within hours, 25,000 mercenaries, armed with tanks, APCs, anti-aircraft systems, seized Rostov-on-Don without firing a shot. Prigozhin broadcast from the southern military district headquarters, surrounded by captured generals, his voice dripping with contempt. This is not a coup. This is a march for justice. Wagner convoys raced 1,000 kilometers north toward Moscow, shooting down 6 helicopters and an Il-22 command plane, killing 13 Russian airmen. Putin went on national television, his face ashen with rage, branding Prigozhin a traitor and vowing to liquidate the rebellion. Moscow declared a counter-terrorism operation. Barricades went up on the M4 highway. By evening of June 24th, the mutiny collapsed. Belarusian dictator Alexander Lukashenko brokered a deal. Charges dropped Wagner to relocate to Belarus. Prigozhin granted safe passage. The columns turned back 200 kilometers from Moscow. The crisis lasted 36 hours, a heartbeat of chaos. 2 months later, on August 23, 2023, Prigozhin's private jet fell from the sky over Tver Oblast in a fireball of betrayal. All 10 aboard, including Wagner co-founder Dmitry Utkin, were killed. The Kremlin denied involvement, but the message was clear. Wagner was dissolved, its remnants scattered to Africa under the Africa Corps or absorbed into the regular army. Bakhmut broke the private army and nearly broke Russia, a wound that would then never fully heal. On May 20, 2023, Prigozhin strode through the skeleton of City Hall, its walls pockmarked with bullet holes, its roof open to the sky. He planted a Wagner flag amid rebar and ash, his voice hoarse with triumph. Bakhmut is ours. We took it with blood and steel. History will remember Ukraine never conceded. It held a narrow corridor along the T-0504 highway and kept counterattacking with the fury of the grieving, their boots soaked in the blood of the fallen. By May 25th, Wagner was gone, replaced by exhausted regulars and DPR militias who wandered the ruins like ghosts. They held a graveyard, a city that had died 1,000 deaths. Bakhmut gained nothing strategic. It did not collapse Ukrainian lines. It did not open the road to Kramatorsk. It did not secure the Yudzivska gas fields. It tied down 50,000 Russian troops for a year, cost Putin his most effective fighting force, triggered a near coup, and exposed the rot within the Russian war machine. For Ukraine, it was a delaying Verdun, a blood sacrifice that bought time for Western weapons to arrive. HIMARS, Patriots, Leopard tanks, to turn the tide elsewhere. The human cost was staggering, a litany of loss. The 93rd Brigade lost 80% of its personnel, entire companies wiped out in days. The city's pre-war population of 80,000 was reduced to fewer than 500 holdouts by May 2023, huddled in salt mine darkness, their hope a flickering candle in the endless night. They lived on rats and rainwater, their children's laughter replaced by silence.